Hey hotshots, Jess with Emotional Fire Academy here today to talk about being heard and understood as a highly sensitive person. Subscribe to my channel below if you are an HSP ready to evolve this year, feel better, up level, reverse burnout, reach your goals. We do all these things here at Emotional Fire Academy where I offer you alternative strategies for life so you can get what you want. You can get what you want. And this is one of them. So, welcome, my name is Jess. I am a Master NLP practitioner and former firefighter. Now, this concept, and I'm gonna bring it all back to itself at the end here with my own personal story. But being heard and understood, when I started to think about this really is part of the original wounding of being a highly sensitive person. And I believe that being HSP is a wound pattern, and because of that wound pattern, we develop this hypervigilance, this really keen, we may or may not have been as observant, but then we become super observant. And so our relationships with other people are very sensitive to us. We're very aware of them. And we feel very isolated. Once we identify ourselves as highly sensitive people, we feel isolated. We seek validation. We feel like we really need these things because the original wounding included a lot of messaging that there's something wrong with you, there's something different, don't act that way. And so there's a sense of really being misunderstood, where typically as a child, it's the emotionality that elicits this message from the people around us. And so that's what's not being understood. They just don't get it in that sense. So this seems to be, as part of that wound complex, something that is thus has extra value for highly sensitive people, and myself included. And so the strategies that we're using, we need to take a really good look at. Because if you're someone who has a really great support system, you feel heard and understood, this video isn't for you. You've already found a great strategy to get that need, to meet that need in your own life. But if you are someone, and like I was, I'm not judging you for it. If you are someone who is just, when you're trying to elicit that, when you're trying to find that feeling, when you're trying to meet that need for yourself, and it's just falling flat in what's happening, like I said, today I'm here to offer you a different perspective so that you can potentially change your strategy, get a different outcome, and really kind of heal. That's what healing is, right? Is essentially, I think, correcting a habit. And so when we keep a wound open, we just keep doing the habit that's kind of creating the wound. When we heal the wound and bring that wholeness in, we've kind of completed the feedback loop, right? We've fixed the habit and now it's self-perpetuating and we don't feel this lack. And the lack is coming from just a habit or a strategy that just isn't cutting it. So it can be as simple as that. It doesn't have to be a reflection on who we are. I just wanted to preface all this for you. So we're going to talk about, often we look to others to be understood, right? We're looking outside of ourselves for other people to hear us, to understand us, and then to validate, to reiterate to us what we are looking for, what we don't sense. Because if we don't feel, if we felt it and sensed it, then whatever they gave back to us would have a flavor of that they understood us. Because if we already felt it, then we're kind of saturating our entire existence in that existing belief or feeling. So let's get deeper into this. We're going to talk about the layers of communication today. And this has a lot to do with it. When I learned this stuff, it blew my mind. I mean, it's invisible to us until we're made aware of it. And then we're like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. So this need that we had to be heard and understood, we often look to others to do it for us, or we seek it from others. And so let's look at when we're communicating, what happens, the different layers. So the first is your mind, your brain, right? Your intention. You feel this need to be understood, And your intention in a lot of people, it manifests as, talking, telling your story, telling your side of it, telling your perspective. Your intention is to share. And so, and there's 4 levels. So it's your intention, you send it then to your mouth, you choose your words, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, right? When we're upset and we're sharing something, the words just come on out. We're not really thinking about the words we're using. We're just kind of spilling our guts. It's this kind of regurgitation of narrative, of story that just kind of comes on out, right? And then it crosses this gap, this gap. We're going to talk about the gap in a bit. To the other person's ear, right? We're talking to someone on the phone or in person, and depending on their listening skills, can affect how much they actually hear, right? Because a lot of us, while we're listening to things, we're carrying on our own narrative. We're almost like conversing with the person as they talk. You know what I'm saying? Like our brain is answering the person and like interrupting them and arguing with them or whatever as they speak. And so we're only half hearing. And so some people don't do that. It's great if you don't. That's a great listening skill, is actually being present and hearing everything. And so again, even if you put the words out there, it might not be picked up fully, right? Some people half listen. Some people have that narrator. Some people are preparing, they're worrying about what they're going to say in response to you, how they're going to soothe you, how they're going to solve your problem. These are all things that the other person's brain starts chugging on. Sometimes they're not even paying attention. So depending on their listening skills, then whatever they do pick up is then carried, hits their mind. And then what they assume from there, right? Their filters kind of take over how they're feeling at the moment, what the meaning is of what they did pick up. Not only what the words that they heard from you, but your body language, right? We're also communicating with the tonality of our words and our body language. So there's so many things going on here that just in that play, the one-way play of communicating something. You remember the telephone game? As a kid, a lot can get misinterpreted. Now, when it comes to, hey, let's meet somewhere at 4:00, that's one thing. But when you come down, it comes down to meaning, the meaning of something. Meaning is such an individual quality. And so, the person here, the mind here, and the mind here are not the same. They're 2 different minds. They've had 2 different wealths of experience. They've had 2 different, even if you say the same word to someone, like love. Is love the same thing for both of these minds? We don't know. We don't know. We can never really know. And that's why I talk about this gap. Because once we release our words with our intention and our word choice, we never know how it's going to land for the other person. And so how it lands, and we can try to manipulate that. We can try to, express as best we can and use the perfect language, but how it lands is out of our hands. It's out of our control. We cannot control how it lands for the other person. And so this philosophically gets into kind of a conundrum. Like, if these are the layers that you have to go through in order for this need to be met, and then have this mind turn around and do the same thing, and they may or may not understand that you're trying to fulfill a need just to be heard. They may or may not, unless you vocalize that, they may not be feeling great. They may be tired. They may be tired of hearing the story. They may have a different viewpoint. There's so many different ways that they can interpret it and then send the message back. That's like 8 layers, of stuff to go through. When they then respond, and we're looking in that response validation that we are not only heard, but we're understood. But we're understood. That's the real kicker. And so that's a lot of complexity. That is a lot of complexity, and like I said, beyond the gap, we don't know how it's going to land for someone. And is that necessary? My question to you is, with all of these layers of communication, is this the best strategy to get that validation that we are understood? And can we ever fully be understood by someone who is in a different point of mind, who is a different mind from us, a separate being? And so this comes back to, starting to recognize, okay, maybe this strategy is spotty at best. The people that really know us and love us and know that sometimes we just need to talk things out, that's great. But there is a deeper strategy here where we can come back to our own intention. And this is kind of the key. And I used to do this. I used to look at, particularly my romantic partners, I would expect them to listen to me and to understand me and to hear me out. And that actually put a lot of stress and strain. And that need actually entangled me, made me extremely codependent in one of my relationships that lasted for 8 years. That need to be heard and understood, that need to be validated. And so I understand, that codependency, when you present this need to someone, it's almost like excuse the word, there's a subtle manipulation because you need this from someone, right? Instead of allowing them to be totally themselves and respond in a way that is authentic and genuine for them, you're expecting them to feed back to you so that you can feel better, so that we can feel better. I'll use we here. And so that is a little bit manipulative because we are looking for that, and this might be our expectation of a partner or a best friend or a sibling or whoever we put in the position of having to listen to us when we're upset, whoever we turn to first. Again, I was guilty of all of this, where I immediately, as soon as something bad happened to me, I would call up my person or persons and just regurgitate it onto them. And the stress and the strain that caused in some of the relationships that I had broke them or kept me in codependency mode, because that we talk about power a lot here, the power imbalance of needing something and then reaching outside of ourselves to get it doesn't give the other person freedom to be themselves, because we're expecting something as opposed to just letting them be themselves and acknowledging that we have this need and then meeting it without looking to them to do that for us, to tend to our wounds. So this is, and again, like I said, I've done this. So what shifted for me? I decided, I was like, what, as I was learning NLP and these strategies, NLP is about bringing on a different strategy. When you look objectively at the strategies you're using and they're not quite working, how can we shift it? How can we shift beliefs? And so I changed my belief that I want to give my romantic partner the freedom to be themselves, because I want to be myself. I want to be myself. I want to be able to speak freely and not be burdened with the emotional caretaking. And so I realized that I couldn't burden someone else with the emotional caretaking as well. So looking at a new strategy. So, what are the chances of actually being perfectly understood when these are two separate minds? The chances are pretty low. And so what we really want to start thinking about is then, who is going to understand you better than you? Who is standing exactly in your shoes, exactly in your place, knowing the full story, having every detail? You are. You are in your shoes, literally and figuratively. You are there in your shoes and you understand. And so who is the best person to listen to you but you, right? And this is where, when we bring it back, if we want to be heard and understood, we're looking for in this communication ripple through all these layers, the perception that we're being understood. Because again, we can never know whether the other person understands us, or they heard us, or they get all the details, or they really comprehend where we're coming from. So we just need the perception that we're being understood. And that we can create for ourselves. So that perception is something we start practicing for ourselves, right? It becomes a habit. So our habit is then to listen to ourselves, to hear ourselves. So when we're upset, when we need to be heard, when we need to regurgitate a story, we sit with ourselves, we sit with that. And I like to put, a hand over my heart. This is kind of like inner child work. And we listen to that part of ourselves pour out that story, that sad story, that anger, that whatever emotion is being felt, that needs to be understood. We sit there and we listen. We give the attention to ourselves. We come back to self. And we're like, I gotcha. I'm hearing you. And we're just hearing this stream of narrative, and it's, and it's like, yeah, I understand. I gotcha. I understand. And so trying this strategy is, in practicing that, in feeling, then we're like, I really understand me. Doing the action is changing the habit of like, I really understand me. I feel really understood and heard. And so then when we do, this is the beautiful paradox that comes when we do this for ourselves. We practice feeling understood and heard and appreciated and listened to. And so then when we do come back to this process, because we don't expect the other person to do it, but that we have practiced the perception of what it feels like to be understood and heard, we're more likely to interpret when the signal comes back from the other person. We're like, oh yeah, that feels like they understand me, because we've practiced doing it for ourselves. I hope that makes sense. Because again, let's reiterate this. When we don't feel understood, we're very unlikely, when the signal comes back to us after we told our story, we're very likely to interpret it as not feeling understood, not being heard, because that's what we're practicing. When we practice the perception that we are understood and heard, because we're primarily doing it for ourselves, and practicing the feeling, what does it feel like to be understood? It feels good. It feels safe and expansive to be able to pour out your soul and somebody gets you. We're practicing these feelings, these other associated feelings that are orbiting around, and that we're practicing that as an emotion of, oh, I feel understood. That feels good. It's a body feel, right? Your heart is happy. It's full. It's like, oh, I'm held. I'm held by the loving ears of someone's loving ears, and their heart, and that they get me. And so we practice that with ourselves. We do that for ourselves, and in not needing it from someone else, we then get it, because we've practiced the vibration of that. And so when the signal comes back, like, yeah, they totally get it. They totally get me, because we've practiced doing that. I think I said practiced enough in this video. So I hope that made sense to you. And like I said, it's a lot of inner child work is sitting there and just, listening to that part of you that is wounded and upset and angry, frustrated, sad, fearful, whatever that part is, whatever the negative emotion is that's coming up, listening to it and not abandoning ourselves. Because often we have mechanisms where we abandon ourselves, where we need to regurgitate the story to someone, or we go eat, or we bury ourselves in a television or a movie or our phone. We tune out when we just need to allow this to come up and be heard. And who better to hear it than us, because we're standing in our own shoes. So I hope that helped. It definitely helped me. And it's, like I said, the beautiful paradox is when you don't expect it from someone, often they give it to you. When you don't need it anymore, often they give it to you, because that's just naturally how the world kind of works. Like, when we're emanating that frequency of I am heard and understood, other people will reflect it back to us. So we get more heard and understood, even more and more. It's like a snowball when we go to our core and do it for ourselves. I hope this helped you. Let me know what you think. Comment below if you are someone who is looking to reach your goals this year, to self-generate a lot of these things and really grow as a highly sensitive person. I can help you do that. Check out my 3-month coaching program, Flammable to Fireproof, below at emotionalfireacademy.com. Thanks for watching.